Hi, I am Chris Stirewalt, and I don't know whether you have heard about this, but apparently there is some sort of election taking place in Virginia this year, and it's gotten a little bit of attention. You are very lucky to be talking to three of my favorite people in the world, and three people who have honest, distinct, and real understandings of how politics work in America's 12th largest state, and arguably the testing ground for the future of politics in America. It's a big deal. You're lucky, and so am I. So meet them. Let's start with Kristen Soltis Anderson. She is the co-founder of the Virginia-based polling firm Echelon Insights. Echelon Insights' thorough analysis of the results of the 2017 Virginia governor's race is a key reference for anyone trying to understand the politics of the Commonwealth. This is true. Samantha Goldstein wrote this, but this is true. She is the author of The Selfie Vote, where millennials are leading America and how Republicans can keep up. She currently hosts The Trend Line with Kristen Soltis Anderson, aptly named, on Sirius XM's POTUS channel. Before co-founding Echelon, Kristen worked with the Winston Group, where she analyzed the youth vote and education reform. She was also a communications advisor to Crossroads Generation, which is based in Glen Ellen, Virginia. She earned her undergraduate degree from the University of Florida and an MA in government from Johns Hopkins University. Say hello to Kristen. No, you can applaud. You can applaud. This would be right. Please meet Robert Hurt. Former Congressman Robert Hurt is the Dean for the Jesse Helms School of Government at Liberty University and the founding director of Liberty's Center for Law and Government. Robert spent nearly 2 decades serving the people of Virginia in elected positions, first in private practice and as a prosecutor in Pennsylvania County, Virginia. Is that true?
Correct.
Bringing people to justice. Before serving 3 years in the Virginia Senate and then 6 years in the Virginia House of Delegates. Robert served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 2011 to 2017, representing Virginia's 5th district, the fighting 5th. That was...
Fighting 9th, but you fought the 5th too.
But that was Thomas Jefferson's district, is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
James Madison was the first member of Congress to represent the 5th district.
I'm more Madison than Jefferson, but we can have that fight later. Congressional district, which encompasses the Piedmont and the Blue Ridge, including Charlottesville, Danville, and Farmville. In Congress, Robert served on the House Financial Services Committee, where he was the vice chairman of the Capital Markets Subcommittee and vice chair of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee. He earned his undergraduate degree from Hampden-Sydney College, a very fine school in the South Side of Virginia, and his Juris Doctorate from Mississippi College. Well, you applaud him too. It's still good. Please also meet Mo Elleithee. My friend is the founding and executive director of Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service. Before he launched the institute in 2015, Mo was a communications director for the Democratic National Committee. He previously spent 7 years as a founding partner at Hilltop Public Solutions. Mo is a veteran of 4 presidential campaigns and several gubernatorial and Senate runs. Mo brings a wealth of experience and expertise on Virginia politics, having served as Tim Kaine's senior strategist for his Senate campaign in 2011 and 2012, senior advisor for Terry McAuliffe's first run for governor in 2009, and communications director for Kaine's gubernatorial race in 2004 and 2005. Mo spent a year as the senior advisor to the Virginia Democratic Party. He got his undergraduate degree from a place fancier than where we got our undergraduate degrees, from Georgetown School of Foreign Service, and an MA in political management from the George Washington University. Okay. So the idea today is that we would talk to people who actually know things instead of people who, like me, know things about knowing things, approximating things. And what I want to do is go down the line here and hear from you, and I want to start with you, Mo. How do you see the race? What is going to happen on Tuesday? What do you think?
I think it's tight. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are freaking out over how tight it is, and they should never have freaked out because it was always going to be tight. There is this misperception out there that Virginia is this solidly blue state, ever since Barack Obama won it in 2008.
The first time a
and
Democrat
2012.
won West Virginia,
Won Virginia.
as a West Virginian, I will make this mistake several times, but the first time that a Democrat won Virginia in the presidential election since 1964.
That's right. And look, Virginia has been trending the right way for my side. But the notion that it's a blue, deep blue state is not even remotely borne out. It's a bluish shade of purple, but it's still purple. And people forget, everyone who's kind of freaking out saying, I can't believe the polls are so tight, Terry McAuliffe should have walked away with this thing. Terry McAuliffe won his last race for governor by 2.5%, right? It was a close race when he won. So it was always going to be a close race, and it's a race that is won or lost in the suburbs of DC, in the suburbs of Richmond, and the suburbs of Norfolk down in Hampton Roads.
Look how he said that, Norfolk. He got the real Norfolk.
I've done
talk.
seven statewide races in Virginia. I learned how to say
You
Norfolk.
learn how to talk about the Tidewater. That's right. Okay, can we, how do I show the slide? I want to show the poll. Oh, am I supposed to be standing over here? There's a clicker over here. All right, we're going to click the clicker. There we go. That's how close it is. That's a very close race. And you can see here, this is 538's average of the polls, which clocks in today at 47.6 to 46.1. Kristen, the most recent Monmouth University poll, which is just one poll, and we, of course, prefer to refer to averages because averages clear out some of the noise here. But this is an extremely close race. Is this what you expected? How do you see the race?
Yeah, it's a very close race, and all of the polls tend to be pointing in the same direction. My firm is going into the field today with its own poll, so that we can.
And by the way, are you, or is anybody up here? Does anybody have a conflict they want to disclose? No representation from anybody? Okay, go ahead.
No, we're just because we're curious, and we're testing out whether text message to web surveys are even remotely accurate. So that's more of what we're doing. We can talk about that offline. But this is a race where all of the public polling is pointing in the same direction. And the big question, I think, on the are the polls right question is turnout in this race, I think, is going to look different than it did in 2020. It's not a presidential year, so you expect turnout to drop off some. And it's also not going to look, I don't think, anything like 2017, which was the last gubernatorial race. Think about what the political environment looked like in 2017. Donald Trump had just won the presidency. Democrats in Virginia and around the country were freaking out. And so the response in 2017 and 2018 was a massive surge in energy and turnout for Democrats.
And Northam didn't win by a bunch, right? It was a fairly narrow victory in a very good year for Democrats.
Yeah, and so this is the sort of thing where, the turnout is, of course, it's going to look a little bit different this time. The political environment is so different. Even a couple of months ago, before President Biden's job approval numbers started ticking downward, even before concerns like inflation started really rising in a big way, it was always going to be a little more challenging for Democrats, just because when you're the party out of power, these elections in Virginia and New Jersey are sort of your party's first chance for like the empire to strike back. And so that's what I think, we are seeing in Virginia, this begin to play out, is Republicans going, okay, we took a beating in 2020 at the federal level, but we feel like we've got momentum on our side now. And someone like Glenn Youngkin is a candidate who's been very savvy at walking the line between being someone who is in line with the Republican base, has not, disavowed Donald Trump or said bad things about him, but at the same time has a message that can go beyond just Republican voters. And that is, I think, why he's able to keep it as close as he is.
As I described him in a column this week, as a business casual version of Mitt Romney. A little, the cuffs are rolled back, and he's got to have a fleece on. Robert, and Samantha will correct me on this, I believe 9 out of 11 of the previous gubernatorial elections in Virginia, the result was predictive of the midterm. There were only those cases out of 25 years where it did not preview what was coming. Some of this can get written off as just the normal thing, as Kristen says. There's a normal thing that Virginia does, and I like this about Virginia, that Virginia is anti, as a West Virginian, which was even anti-Virginia, we actually rejected the whole Commonwealth. I'm kind of into it. Do you see it that way, or do you see something else going on, and how do you see the race?
Well, I think what Mo said about sort of the assessment, the conventional wisdom that Virginia is a blue state is, I think he's spot on, because, and you can see why people fall for that. It's because Republicans haven't won since 2009, a statewide race. And so for those of us who are Republicans, it's kind of rough. And how do you explain that? But I think if you go through and talk about what Robin and Mo both talked about in terms of, if you look at the guts of each election is different. And the atmosphere in each election is different. So when you look at the atmosphere in this election, you can see why I think Youngkin is as close as he is when you look at the issues. And I think, and this is axiomatic probably, but I think when Republicans are running on issues, we're in a lot stronger position. You probably say the same about Democrats. But when you're running on education, public safety, things that people are really spun up about right now, that's good. When you look at the ability for the Republican candidate, Youngkin's ability to raise money, if you look at the cash on hand numbers as you head 10 days into the race, to the end of the race, at the election day, I think that speaks to the momentum. I live in rural Southside Virginia. I live in a place called Chatham, a little town of probably fewer than 1,000.
Well, if you were to guess, what was the vote share in Pennsylvania County, Trump versus Biden?
It was probably 70%.
Yep.
So it's a little different area, but I can tell you, having lived there all my life, that to have the statewide ticket, or to have Governor or candidate Youngkin coming through Chatham last night and have 100 people on a Tuesday night show up, that shows some enthusiasm that I think that and I don't know, where does the enthusiasm fit into the polling? I don't know, but it means something. Danville last night, 200, and I don't know if this has been publicly reported or has been reported, but it's my understanding that in Richmond on Saturday, you had at Obama's rally with Terry McAuliffe, you had 1,000 people. Youngkin claims he had 3,000. I don't want to get into the crowd size.
I was going to say people are saying it's
here.
One of the biggest crowds that have ever happened in Virginia.
But that means something, and I think it goes to the guts of sort of the issues that are at play. And I think if you go back, you can sort of explain sort of why Republicans haven't won for a lot of those same reasons.
Mo, a year ago, we would not have expected that the Virginia Republican nominee would look like Glenn Youngkin, right? As a matter of fact, there were two candidates who were vying to be more MAGA than MAGA, right? You had Pete Snyder, who sort of was doing a J.D. Vance, sort of put on a little extra MAGA hat, and there was Amanda Chase, who bizarrely was a former staffer of Eric Cantor, who reinvented herself as a bomb-throwing, super-baduper populist. And the assumption was that the Republicans were going to nominate somebody who was at least dabbling in kookism, or maybe talking about what was wrong, or why the 2020 election was stolen, et cetera. Youngkin got through more handily than I expected. How do Democrats, and in Virginia as it relates to this race, if you were advising McAuliffe, but nationally, what do you do with a candidate like Youngkin who doesn't quite fit the narrative that, what was his name, Larry Elder in California's recall election fit?
Yeah, look, Youngkin is not, doesn't come across nearly as threatening to suburban voters as the other candidates did. Having said that, he also hasn't been a walk in the park for him in how he navigates sort of the MAGA crowd. He has had some really difficult balancing acts. Can't afford to offend MAGA crowd, or he won't get the 100 people, right, in Danville. But at the same time, if he embraces them too hard, he's not going to get 100 people in Loudoun, right? And that's an even bigger problem. So the McCullough folks have been trying. I guess we'll know next Tuesday how successful they've been. But they've been trying to make the argument that, he may not be as kooky, as using your technical
this is my
term.
term. This is a political science term.
He may
It's,
not be
psephology.
He may not be as kooky as the others outwardly, but he dabbles too much in kookism at the expense of this, right? And you're seeing it here in the closing arguments, even. With Youngkin running an ad that Republicans would say is about schools, right? And it's a very compelling story of a mom from suburban Northern Virginia talking about trying to have some control over what her kids are learning in the classroom and how Terry McAuliffe.
And this is the phrase that has sort of become the touch point for this race, which was in their first debate, I think, that McAuliffe said inartfully, parents should stay out of the class. I forget, what did he say?
I don't want parents deciding.
I don't want parents deciding.
There's something like that, right?
And he was trying to say we have to let teachers teach,
right.
but it came out inartfully.
But on the flip side, right? That would be the Republican argument. On the flip side, the Democratic argument, the McAuliffe argument is, are you kidding me with everything that's going on? You want to go in and ban books?
Right.
And by the way, books by black authors, right? Like that's how the Democrats are approaching this. I think that is an interesting harbinger, right? To your question earlier, that could be an interesting harbinger to what we start seeing in the midterms from both sides. And we'll begin to see on Tuesday. But what I think what the McAuliffe campaign is doing, what Democrats across the country are watching to see how successful it is say, you don't have to be as bombastic with Trumpism. If you are afraid of Trumpism, you got a problem. If you are afraid of Trumpism so much that you got to run an ad about banning books instead of focusing on the work we got to do, that's a problem. Now, here's the other interesting thing Democrats are doing. They are running more against Washington than Republicans are right now in Virginia. You've got McAuliffe out there saying, hey, Congress, get your act together. Much more than Republicans are doing. That is a very Virginia Democrat argument. Going back to Mark Warner in 2001, going back to Tim Kaine in 2005. Interestingly, Washington was run by Republicans at the time in both those cases. But their argument at the time was we can't let Richmond start to look like Washington in terms of the dysfunction. I find it fascinating that Terry is the first one and the most aggressive out there saying, hey, Washington, get your act together because we need you to do your job so we can do what we're doing.
If you want to know how contrary Virginia is, in 2001, so 2002 was the only time, I believe that's the only time in American modern political history where the party in power did not lose seats in the midterm, was 2002. But in his first midterm, Clinton did not lose seats in 98. But in the first midterm, in 2001, 2 months after the 9/11 attacks, Virginia elected a Democratic governor. So Virginia does like to be ornery, Kristen. Well, actually, Robert, you had a point to make. You had your hand up. What were you going to say?
No, I was just wondering about Mo's point about McAuliffe running against Washington. My question is he's doing that now, but he didn't start out doing that, and obviously the things have changed. But as he's gotten closer and Biden has tanked, his numbers have tanked, it makes more sense. What McAuliffe was doing at the very outset was just trying to say, okay, Youngkin equals Trump and it's game over. But that didn't work. And so he's pivoted from that.
We don't know if it worked yet, right? We don't know.
So I guess a good question after the election will be, would it have been smarter if McAuliffe had taken a page out of the Warner Kaine playbook at the beginning of the campaign as opposed to in the last couple of weeks?
The difference is at the beginning of the campaign, he didn't have as much clear opportunity to do that as he does now. Washington has made that argument a whole hell of a lot easier for him over time.
And also, I just to whenever possible point out my correctness. I said a long time ago, if Biden's numbers are under 45, that McAuliffe will have trouble. How much is this, Kristen, indexed to Biden and the national political discussion? How much is this a proxy for that?
I think it's partially about the candidates involved and partially about the national environment. So here, I brought some numbers. The political journey of some key counties in Virginia over the last 2 decades. And I think a county like Loudoun County, for me, is one of the most interesting ones to think about.
And I want to do a timeout before you do this. So for anybody who doesn't hang out with this stuff, you can think of Loudoun County as either the easternmost county of Western Virginia or the westernmost county of Eastern Virginia. It is on the bubble. It is the most affluent, has the highest per capita income of
Horse
any
country, this and sort
and
of
McMansion's spread out as like cream cheese on a bagel as far as the eye can see.
well, and a lot of suburban, exurban growth that's been out there. It's grown a lot. It used to be the kind of place that Republicans could win pretty easily. In 2000, Bush wins it with 56% of the vote. He gets the same percentage in 2004. Then Obama comes onto the scene. And actually, Loudoun County suddenly becomes slightly Obama territory. And actually, Obama wins Loudoun County in both 2008 and 2012. And then Loudoun County just has this slow descent toward becoming bluer and bluer and bluer until you've gone from 2000, Bush winning with 56%, to in 2020, Trump only winning 36%. So a 20-point drop over 20 years. But there's one interesting exception to that, and that is the 2009 governor's race, Bob McDonnell. Bob McDonnell, immediately on the heels of Barack Obama becoming elected president, wins 61% in Loudoun County. And I feel like Youngkin spiritually is somewhat similar to the Bob's for Jobs message that Republicans were successful with.
Whoa, the throwback. Very nice.
Yes,
I like it.
This was the Republican message in 2009 was to be focused on the economy, to be focused on these issues, to try not to get involved in the national political environment too much and just sort of let it work with you if it could. Because this was, again, the sort of the beginnings of the rumblings of the Tea Party movement were happening around then. And it worked out really well for Republicans. And being able to sort of claw back from a 36% in Loudoun County to even getting back to something like 50, I do think is something that is realistic or closer to realistic for Glenn Youngkin than I think some may have thought. So the national political environment helps Republicans because it means Democrats are less fired up, perhaps less enthusiastic. I know the CBS poll, which was the first big warning sign poll. That
YouGov, boo.
You don't like it?
Boo.
Well, when they asked people to what extent do you feel enthusiastic about participating in the race, the Youngkin voters had a little more of an edge.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, a vote cast enthusiastically does not count more than a vote that is not cast enthusiastically.
But you might take your mother-in-law to the polls. You
Right.
might tell your neighbor that you actually like this guy.
So at least a week or two ago, Republicans had that enthusiasm advantage. The national political environment wasn't as good for Democrats. They were staying home. And in Youngkin, you had a candidate who looked more like what Republicans looked like the last time they were successful in Virginia. I think that matters.
Robert, the Republicans in Virginia have typically been non-weird. We think about people like Bob McDonnell. We think about people like Eric Cantor. We think about people like George Allen, who typify a kind of mainstream Republicanism that was very much in vogue 20 years ago, that was this sort of mainstay. But we've also watched in Virginia as things are getting a little spicier. We watched in your former district the sitting incumbent Denver Riggleman got ousted. Your successor got ousted in a weird drive-through primary because he had officiated a gay wedding. We watched what was his name, Corey Stewart, a aggressive, radical immigration restrictionist, bombed out, got the lowest vote share of any Republican running statewide in the past decade. He came in with 40% of the vote. There has been a little weirdness going on. How do we receive Youngkin? Is he a throwback? Is he a look forward? Like, how does he fit in this space?
Well, I think to an earlier point that was made, what Republicans have lost and have began losing after Bob McDonnell's race were the independents. In places like Chesterfield and Henrico that were these solid, just you could never imagine.
And to only interrupt briefly, when you think about how Virginia breaks down politically, there's essentially 4 regions to track. You've got Western Virginia that Loudoun may be the capital of, or maybe it's moved into something else. But you have Western Virginia, which is much like West Virginia. the best Virginia, 30 points Republican. It's heavy duty Republican. And then you have Northern Virginia, which is 25 probably points Democratic. Is that right, Mo?
Well, maybe even a little bit more these
Yeah,
days,
it could be 30, but that is heavily Democratic. And then you have the Tidewater area, which has a lot of African American votes and has been a wellspring of support for Democrats over time, right? Newport News, Norfolk, that area has been very crucial for Virginia Democrats. And then you have, this is to your point, then you have the I-95 corridor, which is Richmond and suburbs. So basically we're talking here, Henrico County, Chesterfield County, north suburbs of Richmond down to Colonial Heights on the south side on 95.
And those were Republican strongholds that you could never imagine losing. And over the last 10 years, of the combination of sort of message and issues and candidates, every candidate brings different strengths. Messaging and the issues are maybe something that you can have less control over because of the timing of any campaign. But I think that's contributed a lot to Republicans finding themselves in no man's land for as long as we have. I think Youngkin as a candidate appeals to in a way that other candidates maybe haven't in the past. He as a Republican, he appeals to I think suburban voters. The independent voters, if you look at the numbers that between the two candidates as it relates to the independent vote, but he appeals to them, and I think it's partly it's how you say it, right?
Yeah.
Partly how you say it, but it's also driven by the issues. And again, if you're talking about the bread and butter issues of public education and public safety, and you've got your wind at the back on those two issues, some of that is some of those things are issues that you can control, but the truth of it is a lot of it is atmospherics. It's just luck. And if you have positioned yourself in a place where you can take advantage of that, and I think that he has done that very well. I mean, to take advantage of this of McAuliffe's the statement that he made that is now, everybody will
bumper sticker. Yeah.
I mean, it's everywhere, and that's the kind of thing that I think ultimately could make Virginia give us a Republican government.
Mo, your forehead is deeply crinkled, and I want you to respond, but I want you to respond in this context. For all the time that I have known and admired your work, you have called your fellow Democrats into a kind of politics that is persuasive and inclusive as opposed to destructive and divisive. You have, and I think this is borne out by the Virginia Democrats with whom you worked, right? People who, like Mark Warner, like Tim Kaine, who were, make a bigger circle, don't cut the circle in half. How has McAuliffe done in that regard, and what advice would you give him about how to deflect these questions?
What's fascinating to me, I wasn't crinkling my head at everything Robert said. I actually agree with a lot of what Robert said, but here's the thing. I think in 2005, Tim Kaine versus Jerry Kilgore. Jerry Kilgore ran a culturally combative campaign. The whole thing was on the death penalty. His entire attack line against Tim Kaine. Tim Kaine was the first anti-death penalty governor in the Commonwealth of Virginia. First anti-death penalty candidate, openly so.
Amazing.
And
right? In 2005.
I looked this up the other day, by the way. Jim Gilmore, as governor, presided over the execution of 45.
Virginia was proud of the fact that it was second to Texas in the number of executions, right?
And let's just be clear, Virginia General Assembly has now outlawed the death penalty.
That's right.
No, it's
been a remarkable journey.
I mean, just unbelievable.
They're pro-life.
But my point, so Kilgore runs these incredibly scathing ads, right? Political watchers, remember Larry Sabato said, these ads are the Hiroshima and Nagasaki of political ads.
But other than that, they were fine.
Everyone thought we were done. We were done. Our response ad, so Kilgore went 100% on these attack ads. Our response was split 50-50 in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. 50% of it was our response to the death penalty, which was a pretty good response.
If you do say so.
The other 50% was Tim Kaine talking about his plan to alleviate traffic. Because our feeling was, even if this is a pro-death penalty state, people care more in those two regions about traffic than they do about the death penalty.
Yeah, the Powhite Parkway and 66 carry a lot of votes on them.
Virginia, with a couple of exceptions, tends to reject cultural warriors. What's really fascinating to me is that both candidates in this race seem to be running on cultural issues while trying to mask them as bread and butter issues.
Excellent point.
I think Youngkin and the education thing is tapping into a lot of the cultural warfare that you see playing out on the airwaves of my other employer, right? Over at Fox News, they tend to think a lot of the, with all the talk about critical race theory and all that stuff, that's the single biggest issue. But he's making it not feel like the way they make it feel over there.
Yeah.
Terry is talking a lot about choice, trying to compare, or connect Youngkin to what happened in Texas and the legislation there. Now, Virginia has a history of choice being a very effective issue for Democrats, going back to Doug Wilder, as you'll recall, right? The nation's first black governor won on choice, in part. Terry's trying to connect it there, but trying to do it in a way that says, I actually don't want to talk about choice. I want us to be focused on the economy, but here's what you can expect of Youngkin, right? They're both trying to make each other out as the cultural warrior while tapping into the cultural warfare issues that benefit their side. And frankly, they both, whether you're talking about schools or whether you're talking about choice, are talking to the same voters, right? And I'd be curious what you think on this based on your polling. Both are speaking to suburban moms in Loudoun County and Chesterfield County, which I think are two of the most important counties to watch. We'll see which one is the bigger draw.
I had a picture of them up previously, but now it says we have no signal. And when that noise happens from the AV guys, that's never a good sign. But Kristen, the challenge, so the slide I was about to show was about the change. Oh, it's up. Well, now I want to do the other one. Did I break it again? Not important. Virginia's population has changed enormously in the past 20 years. The composition of Virginia is blacker, browner, younger, more affluent, more educated. There's a lot of selfie voters voting in Virginia. How much of this, and there is Democrats have a problem, and this is not Rudy Teixeira's fault, but there is a demography is destiny thing that Democrats tend to embrace and forget.
Not all of us.
No. No, well, one of the reasons I champion Mo at Fox all my years at Fox is that he tells it like it is and is real with Democrats and Republicans, and it's an admirable thing. But the demography is destiny crowd among Democrats would look at Virginia and say, it's ours. It's coming our way. The number of black voters, the number of younger voters, that's the way it is. How do you see that?
Well, let's go to a different state like Texas and look at the types of places in Texas where Donald Trump did the best in 2020 relative to where he had been in 2016. Some of the most diverse parts of Texas right along the southern border. Places that were supposed to be, Republicans can't hold on to Will Hurd's old district if he's not there. Not the case. Or in Florida, not just the Cuban population in South Florida, but Puerto Rican voters in Osceola County, right near where I grew up.
Even some Haitians,
It becomes a place that, again, these are not all becoming Trump voters, but moving ever so slightly. There's a really fascinating map from the 2020 election. I think the New York Times did it, where they took every precinct in every precinct in Georgia and showed how it swung relative to 4 years before. And around Atlanta, there's this big blue donut, right? That's like your Loudoun counties and your Fairfax counties.
Alpharetta,
Yeah, all turning blue. But then actually the center city of Atlanta is like light pink. And you saw this in a couple of other places too. This is not to say Republicans are doing great with voters of color, but weirdly, like our polarization along racial and ethnic lines has decreased slightly as Democrats have done better with white college-educated voters and as Republicans have slightly improved their standing, particularly with Hispanic voters, that now it's education that's much more of what polarizes you. And so in a place like Northern Virginia, for instance, how can Republicans win back college-educated voters if Youngkin is able to pull back the sorts of voters that live in Loudoun County and would have voted for George W. Bush, but walked away from the GOP about 10 years ago and haven't really looked back? And if he wins them on an issue like talking about the schools, tapping into the frustration that parents, regardless of political affiliation, feel about the way things like COVID-19 was handled by the public schools. You don't have to care anything about the issues of race in the schools or what have you to be frustrated with public schools these days. And so if Youngkin has found this as a bridge issue where he can, in one breath, sort of say something that the base understands to very much be in line with their interests, but suburban voters can also hear something in it for them, you can bet that this will be replicated by Republicans across the country for the next 12 months.
My friend and a platonic ideal of punditry, Charles Krauthammer, said that to be effective, basically you have to be able to talk in two frequencies simultaneously, Robert. You have to be able to have a message that educated elites understand, but you also have to give it to them in a way that will not upset or bother the base. And I think that's probably true for both parties to a degree. Youngkin has struggled on the question of how to deal with Trump. McAuliffe has said the word Trump more than any. The only person who has said Trump more than Terry McAuliffe is Donald Trump. McAuliffe and Donald Trump are aligned on one issue. They want the election to be about Donald Trump. At the beginning, Youngkin flailed a little bit around this, right? He struggled because he didn't, you work in Lynchburg, he didn't want to offend Republicans who lived in that part of the state by saying that something as radical as Joe Biden won the election. He didn't want to do that, but at the same time, he wanted to speak in that other frequency for the voters that Kristen's talking about in the suburbs. Eventually, he came to a point where he said, Donald Trump lost the election, and he got there and he did it. Should he have done it sooner? Should he have done it differently?
I don't know. I mean, I think he's in a pretty good place right now. I mean, we've got 6 days to the election. Who knows what could happen on that between now and then? But I think what Youngkin has tried to say wisely is this election is not about Donald Trump. This is about the people who've supported Donald Trump, half the country that voted for him. This is about them. And I think if you remember that that's who you're always talking to, that's your audience are the people. And I don't mean just Trump voters, obviously.
Well, right.
He's appealing to trying to appeal to all of them.
47% will not feed the bulldog.
But I do think that's how he has been. I think he's successfully handled that, and I would not have predicted that at the beginning of this race. But what I do think is interesting, you go back to what I was saying earlier about the fact that I think, and this speaks to the larger, the midterms next year. How will Democrats just talk about Trump all the time, or is it a dead issue? I mean, I don't know, but it didn't really stick, and I think fair-minded people across Virginia, whether the Republicans or Democrats, are just like, yeah, that guy, he's gone, and so let's talk about something that's important to me. And I just wanted to build on what Mo and Kristen were saying about the in terms of the importance of education and public safety in the messaging in this go around. It's interesting. Yes, I can see the issues can be cast as culture war type issues, but I think it's also important to remember in Virginia, and for those of you who may not follow Virginia General Assembly,
for those handful of people who do not,
follow, and most Virginians don't.
Yeah.
But on the heels of COVID-19, on the heels of all of the bathroom politics that was going on in Washington, on the heels of tremendous state action that was taken as it relates to law enforcement. I mean, threatening qualified immunity. These are all issues that Virginians have been hearing about and pounding on over time. And like all of a sudden, these issues are now, maybe they can be cast as cultural issues, but reasonable people are like, yeah, I've been hearing a lot about that, and this is interesting to me.
Okay, Mo, I have a theory.
Or troubling to me, I should say, not interesting. Excuse me.
Stipulated. Mo, I have a theory, which is that Democrats overlearned the lessons of the California recall, which was never going to be competitive, and that was never going to happen. And the lesson that Democrats seem to receive from it was that the Trump that Gavin Newsom used in California was the blueprint. And it is not no, but it's yes and that the Democrats will need more than that to be competitive in 2022. Did some of that afflict McAuliffe's campaign? Was there too much one-noteism?
It is too soon to do any postmortems.
I like that you're holding out.
I'm not going to do a pre-postmortem.
We're not projecting the outcome.
But here's what I will say: I 100% agree with a lot of what you guys are saying, and I would say, if there's one thing I think we have learned in the Trump era, is that Donald Trump's popularity or unpopularity is not necessarily transferable to down ballot candidates, right? We saw that in the last cycle, where Joe Biden had a really good night, but the rest of the Democratic Party did not. Republicans picked up seats. They held the Senate. They crushed us in state legislative chambers across the country, right? Donald Trump's popularity does not necessarily transfer outside of primary politics, nor does his unpopularity necessarily transfer unless the Republican candidate is a Larry Elder, right?
Yeah,
is a Marjorie Taylor Greene,
yep.
is like someone who's riding that horse. And so I think Democrats need to realize that Trump is a great motivator for their base, but he is not going to be on the ballot except where he is, except where the Republicans put him on the ballot, where they embrace him so much. That we've got to have a little bit more than Donald Trump to make our argument. And look, when I was at the DNC in 2014, we did these focus groups. Now, that was a different era. 2014 was a completely different era in Republican.
Yeah, that's like the Stone Age.
Right, in Republican Party politics. But the moderator did these really fascinating, exercise in focus groups we did of swing voters around the country. Gave everyone a piece of paper and a pen and said, I'm just going to say a word. You got 15 seconds. Draw the first picture that comes to mind. First word was Republican. Right, and this was 2014. I don't think this would be the same answer today, but the most commonly drawn picture was a dollar sign. The Republican Party was the party of the wealthy. I'm thinking, this is awesome. As the DNC spokesperson, this is exactly what I want. Flip it over. Next word is Democrat. What's the most commonly drawn picture? Question mark. Ugh. I can't think of a worse picture to have drawn. And I worry that still could be the case sometimes. And that's where I think the over-reliance on Trump is a problem if we can't answer what that question mark is.
Does everybody here know Will Rogers' great witticism on that front? You know the line? I'm a member of no organized political party. I am a Democrat. All right, Kristen, when we think about Virginia, we think about the counties that we left behind, that we didn't take out of the Confederacy. We think about Northern Virginia. We think about all these places. But taken as a whole, Virginia is a very educated, very affluent state. Virginia is sort of the Massachusetts of the South in certain ways, given, now, Robert.
Please.
Please.
This is just outrageous.
A lot of Massachusetts revere their state. But when I say the Massachusetts...
And they think Plymouth Rock was before Jamestown.
I know.
Okay.
But we don't, I did not mean to trigger you, sir. But the reality is that Virginia is starting to look a lot like Maryland, right? And Larry Hogan, the Republican governor of Maryland, demonstrates how you can be a successful Republican in a state that is blue or trending blue. Am I calling this right? Is that what Virginia really looks like? Is this an affluent, educated state that is going to be more Democratic, where Republicans are going to have to pick their shots, or is it something else?
Well, look, Republicans can win statewide races in actual Massachusetts.
Yeah, no,
Charlie
their
Baker, they
governor,
can win.
Charlie Baker's
usually
Republican.
do.
Yeah, you know, there are states in the Northeast right now that would never even think about voting for Donald Trump, but have Vermont has a Republican governor. I mean, so statewide.
That's all I meant, Robert.
And not
That's all
just
I meant.
statewide, but especially gubernatorial elections are just different because the issue set is different. The things that you do as governor are different than the things you do as senator, than the things you do as a member of Congress, than the things you do as president. And especially in a state like Virginia, where your race is in this like weird year when there aren't other
year.
federal things happening on the ballot, you really can focus on that entirely different issue set, which if you look at the sorts of things where Republicans and affluent college-educated voters have parted ways, some of them are issues that are handled at a state level, which is why I think the Supreme Court taking up arguments on the Texas bill on November 1st, the day before the election on November 2nd, is probably not great news for Glenn Youngkin, because the last thing he wants is for that to be the story the day before Election Day, is what did the Supreme Court potentially signal it's going to do about abortion. So there are plenty of issues that are hot button issues in the news that do not favor Republicans reunifying with these college-educated suburban voters. But issues like taxes, issues like inflation, issues like, and then you mentioned public safety a lot. That also, think about the education issue broadly and the different avenues you can come into this. You can be in favor of doing something different about education because you watched your kids sit at home and do classes on Zoom all last year and you were horrified that this is what we're considering education. You could be frustrated that they've now gone back to school, but their kids are all still having to wear masks, and it just feels crazy that kids are having to wear masks on the playground. Or you could be frustrated over race, or you could be frustrated over the horrible story about sexual assault that happened, I think that was in Loudoun County, and whether, were there political considerations in sort of covering up what happened to a student. Or there are some school districts that have said they don't want to have school resource officers, no police officers in schools anymore. So if maybe education's not your number one issue, but safety is, okay, well, that's a link into the education issue. And so Youngkin has used this as a bridge where, again, there are plenty of ways for the base to come to him on that issue, but there are also ways that sort of a concerned, independent suburban mom could come in as well. It's bridging that gap. And that's, again, why I think a lot of Republicans, if Youngkin is close, or certainly if he wins, are going to be harping on this issue for the next year for sure.
Robert, during the pandemic, a lot of sports fans started watching Korean baseball because it was the only sport being played anywhere in the world. So sports junkies in the United States became avid fans, of the Seoul Tigers or whatever, because it was what was available. How much of our scrutiny of Virginia, and you certainly experienced this in 2010, this has been part of your experience. How much of all of this frenzied, we're all sitting here today doing this, though many of you just came for the cookies afterward, but how much of this scrutiny is just because this is the only game in town?
I mean, I think Donald Trump is such a huge figure now in our American history. That I think that it is more than just, I think it's a lot more than just the fact that we're an off-year election. And I want to know what's going to happen in New Jersey. I hope maybe you'll mention that if you have any thoughts about that. But I think because of that, because he kind of broke the system the way it had traditionally usually been done.
Why is this election so normal? I got a Romney Republican running against a Clinton Democrat. Why is that, if he broke the system, why is it so normal?
I just think that I think that is because the future of the Republican Party in many ways I think is at stake. That's what I think the Democrats want to see. And then how do the Republicans respond to that? I think that's the story here. Of course, it has everything to do with the midterms, and it always does. But I do think that's the.
I think one reason why we focus so much on the Virginia race as well is, one, it's in the backyard.
That's right.
Everybody's here.
We're so lazy.
You can engage.
We're so lazy.
You can engage
in.
So I feel like I know much more about the Virginia race than the New Jersey race because sometimes I drive through Northern Virginia and I see Youngkin signs in places where you never would have seen a Cuccinelli sign, and my data side of my brain says, that's not data, and the other side of my brain goes, it's wild that there are Youngkin signs in Fairfax County, what does it mean? And so I think it's Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter who has likened elections to like it's Christmas presents under a tree, and you're just like waiting for election day to finally like open them up and see what's inside. And I feel like Virginia is a chance to like pick one up and kind of shake it. Like to just figure out, okay, well, what is under the tree? Like, what are we going to get next year? Virginia is like the one your parents let you open the night before Christmas to see what's going on.
And as somebody who lives in Virginia, it's also, I mean, Republicans haven't won since 2009. So it's a big story, I think. But,
it certainly is. All right, so Mo, Democrats have an incredible capacity to panic. I've never the ability of Democrats to just have a bowel stewing anxiety followed by enormous panic. Are you concerned that even a close outcome? So as we know, we're not forecasting today. We don't know how it's going to turn out. But even if it's just close, that Democrat, and I've read 75 think pieces, I wrote some of them, about what the consequences of this are. Are you concerned that Democrats are going to overinterpret the results of this election?
Look, I belong to a political party. We are all born as bedwetters. We just never grow out of it. And like, that's not going to change. Yes, no, I don't know. I mean, yes, we will overthink whatever happens, in part because that's what my party does, and that's in part because what we all do. We all overthink it, unless you're, Kristen, who always lets that data side of her brain like dominate eventually.
I'm still convinced the yard signs might mean something this time.
But look, yes, it is very easy. It is very easy to overlearn from these things. Sometimes you might see some trends and you got a year to course correct. Other times, it could just be a candidate thing that people overthink and try to apply because that's what we do. That's what everyone that does what we do does that. Here's, at the end of the day, I believe we are living in a hyper-polarized, hyper-nationalized time. I do not believe all politics are local anymore. I believe no politics are local anymore. I believe we're talking about schools in a very local sense, but we're not. We're talking about it in a very national sense.
These are stand-ins for other
These
debates.
topics, everyone is watching this because we're living in times now where what we're talking about here, we're going to be talking about here. We might talk about it a little bit differently, but we're still going to be talking about the same thing. How does Donald Trump, how does Joe Biden factor into all of this? All of these things are going to matter. But at the end of the day, where the national winds are blowing us generally are going to dominate. Now, here's the caveat to that, because there's always a caveat, right? The number one rule of politics is there are really no rules. I still believe organization matters in a close race.
Yep.
Right? A good organization is worth a point or two, and in a race like this, a point or two could matter. Democrats have organization. They've built on it ever since Mark Warner in 2001. Tim Kaine took it to the next level. Terry McAuliffe took it to the next level. I believe the infrastructure of the Virginia Republican Party has been a hot mess for some time now. And so,
speaking of drive-through primaries, it
is just a hot mess. Democrats Derek McAuliffe never stopped organizing since he won in 2013. So that could matter. That really, if it's a close race, it will be that Terry wins, his organization will have carried him across. And I don't think Youngkin has the same organization. A few yard signs in Fairfax County.
She knows. I have the same problem. As the 1,000 times that I've told people, yard signs don't matter. When I see them, I'm saying, that's a pretty big yard sign. That's a pretty big yard sign. Go ahead.
I would just, to complement that, I would say that Youngkin, first of all, I think his business background reveals that he is very oriented on process and on building an organization and using all the resources necessary to deliver the organization that you're talking about. I couldn't believe, honestly, that he won the nomination.
I was certainly surprised that he won it decisively. He won it on the first ballot.
And I think it speaks. I think it speaks to his level and the discipline that he brings to looking at how you have to do it to win. And I wouldn't count him out in terms of building the organization. I didn't say that.
I mean,
say that.
Look, he's a great candidate with a great campaign. 100% agree with that. But they're just starting much later than the other side. And the other side has a world-class operation.
And the early voting, I mean,
and that was the next thing.
the Republicans are, just now saying, get out, have you voted, and I think mastering, if that's the right word, mastering that whole process is new. I heard one of the candidates saying, look, if you will just vote early, we'll stop sending you mail, which I thought was a great incentive.
Can they turn off ads? Are they also able to turn off ads?
Well, and that's the other thing. And this feeds into that, right? The Republican war on early voting for the past couple of years is the most idiotic thing I have ever seen.
No, they're not. Trump isn't just against early voting. He's against voting, period. He's telling them not to participate at all.
And so while I do believe the Youngkin campaign has tried to actually take advantage of this situation better than your average Republican would, there's a cultural block against it that I think they should be worried about. Now, they will win Election Day. There's no question. And here's the other thing, by the way. Expect a late night. Do not read anything into the early returns because Fairfax County is the most incompetent place in the world when it comes to counting votes.
Palm Beach County notwithstanding, yes.
And we will not know how Fairfax County votes. They will be the last, and they're the largest county, and they're one of the most Democratic counties.
Mo will be pouring free bourbons at Georgetown for anybody who wants to
I'll be just call me in an hour. But the point is, the early vote is a real problem, I think, for Republicans. And you cannot compare, I agree, you cannot compare this election to the last one because of how much different it is and the pandemic era voting mechanisms that went into effect. But there is a higher percentage of Democrats who have voted as of today, this time, than there was on this day 4 years ago.
I know that's a fact. Okay, Kristen, one more question for you, and then I have a lightning round punishment for all of you. And then hopefully, do we have questions? Okay, so Kristen, last question is, what number should I look at? What is the single statistic that I should most be looking at in these results? What's the thing that you think will be the most? When you unwrap the present, what is the thing that you most want to see?
So I think I'm going to be looking at those two counties. When returns are coming in, Loudoun and Henrico are the two that I'm going to be looking at to see, okay, do they look like 2017 type numbers, or I'm assuming they'll be better. How much better? Are we finally back to looking something closer to 2009? So those are two of the counties. If you're looking to, scroll and refresh returns and you want to narrow it down from the vast wealth of data that you'll have in front of you, that's what I'm going to be doing. But the other thing I'll be interested in is that question where they ask people, what is the issue that most motivated you, and how does that break down? Presumably the exit polls will ask people, and in the public polling I've seen so far, jobs and education are the top two issues. So on the issue of jobs, is Glenn Youngkin's message winning out there with him talking about things like we need, I'm a business guy, grocery tax, cost of living, jobs and economy, that his message, or McAuliffe's message on things like minimum wage and we need Congress to pass Build Back Better? On education, do you have Glenn Youngkin making real inroads on an issue that normally favors Democrats by a ton? Or, and we haven't even talked about this really that much yet, but this latest ad about the book Beloved, is that a step too far? And suddenly some of these suburban moms who were like, oh, I'm basically with him, but that's not really what I meant. Does that suddenly lose him some of those people, and maybe the election is held a week too late?
Yeah, don't come for Toni Morrison. Definitely don't come for Toni Morrison.
And so I'm going to be curious to see among people who say education is their top issue, does Youngkin have an advantage? I think he might, but if so, by how much?
Well, that's the insight I'll be ripping off from my column the week after next. You heard it here first. Okay, down the row, starting with you, Dean Hurt. What will the outcome be? What's the number?
It's going to be tied.
No. Oh, we all know it's going to be tied. The polls are tied.
I would like to be candidate Youngkin, I think, now at this stage, just because of the
pick a number. What's his vote share going to be? What percentage of votes is he going to get?
52%.
That'd be good. Okay. KSA?
I'm not doing it. I told you, I've got my poll in the field.
You were.
I'll send you the results.
Okay, and I know Mo's going to definitely filibuster this. Not going to do it. He is too. There's no way.
The only dumb guy.
All I'm going to say is I'm not going to be surprised. No matter what the outcome is, I will not be surprised.
Good.
I say Youngkin gets 48.7% of the vote.
All right.
And I'll stand bourbons for the rest of you.
All right.
If I'm wrong. Okay, Samantha, do we have any questions? We do have questions. Does anybody in the room have a question? Do we have virtual questions?
How many people in the room are from Virginia? I'm just curious.
We got one, John, but we brought him from the building, so we didn't have to truck it in. He didn't come up here from Danville. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Hi, yeah. So I have a question for Kristen and Mo in particular. If you were advising the McAuliffe campaign and we could wind back the clock 6 months, what would you tell them to do differently?
Great question.
I think it would be to have a message besides Donald Trump is bad and Donald Trump is Glenn Youngkin. I mean, I think that's what's so problematic. It was like a week or two ago that you have McAuliffe running an ad. The whole point of the ad is, I promise I really didn't say that thing that there's a clip of me saying about parents shouldn't have input in what school boards are teaching kids. That's not what you want your closing message to be. And I feel like the fact that I can sort of summarize Glenn Youngkin's message as things aren't working, I'll focus on jobs and education, and I don't really know what I'm sure Mo has an answer for what that is for McAuliffe, but I, as someone in the DC media market who watches a lot of live sports and sees a lot of these ads, it would be harder for me to summarize McAuliffe's statement again, beyond make it 2015 again? I'm not sure.
No, and actually I would say it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It's here's what 2023 looks like, right? That's the thing. Elections are always about two things. Right? They're about a choice in direction, and they're about the future.
Amen.
That's it, right? That's what they're about. And, one of the things some people, I actually was not, because I actually thought Terry, gets this. And I honestly, I think we're talking about him as if he's already lost. I actually think there's a very good chance Terry wins, right?
I think it's more likely
than not that he wins.
He will lose. Yeah.
I actually believe that. But there's a lot of people who are like, God, is Terry just going to talk about his record? Or are they going to talk about what's next, right? Here's what's really fascinating to me. The Democratic, take outside of Virginia for a second. The Democratic message 6 months ago could not have been more crystal clear. Checks in your wallet, shots in your arms.
Yep.
That was it. That was what everybody was saying. And so if you're asking me what the Democratic message should have been in Virginia, I don't know, what should it be in 2022? It should be checks in wallets, shots in arms, and here's what's next. And they better get their frickin' acts together on deciding what is next, because right now what everyone thinks is next is $3 trillion. Just a big heap of money, not what that $3 trillion gets you. Just $3 trillion. That's what I think Democrats need to do. I think Terry tried at times, but got sucked into some other conversations. But it is checks in arms, checks in wallets, shots in arms. That's what we delivered, and here's what we're going to give you next.
And when Joe Manchin tells them what they're going to do, they'll let us know. Okay, do we have another question in the room? Anybody? Yes, sir. And if you're with somebody, tell us who you're with.
Oh, I'm not with anybody.
I'm sure you're with somebody. You're with somebody.
Nobody worthwhile talking about. So I know you talked a little bit about Glenn Youngkin needing to talk with two different frequencies. How he needs to connect to the moderate voters and also to the MAGA crowd, as you put it. Typically, the conventional wisdom is that Republicans fall in line and Democrats fall in love. But it seems like that Republicans may have fallen in love a little bit with Donald Trump, and that I would think that this would be why Glenn Youngkin needs to talk to these two different groups of voters rather than just garnering the support automatically from the Republican Party. Would you guys agree?
Everybody always has to talk to both groups of those voters. That is true throughout the ages. That is always the case. But something is changing in politics. which is Democrats are becoming more strategic in their voting and Republicans are becoming more emotional in their voting. So over time, and you guys will correct me where I'm wrong here, but over time we understood the aphorism that you cited was very true. Democrats nominate people that they fall in love with, they get excited about somebody, and this is great. And Republicans nominate Bob Dole, right? They nominate the guy they're supposed to do, the next person in line, the Mitt Romney. But Robert, did you watch in 2020 how Democrats were very strategic in their voting? The idea that somehow Democrats were going to be captive to the Bernie Bros and democratic socialism was riding roughshod over everything. And then the Democratic electorate said, no, we'll take the elderly white man from Delaware, please. You disagree, Mo?
I don't think that was, I think that there was emotion there. I do think there was emotion in the selection of Joe Biden as our nominee. I think a lot of Democrats were like, oh my God, just give me something normal. Just give me Uncle Joe. I want to feel good about the world again. I'm tired of being pissed off.
And beat Trump.
Yeah, and beat Trump. And maybe just not being pissed off is what's going to beat the guy. My point is, I think there actually is a Democratic emotional attachment to Joe Biden.
I'm not saying that you're loveless. What I mean is that strategic voting, which used to be a more Republican thing, Democrats are becoming more strategic in their voting. I think part of this is social media. I think part of this is their awareness, because it's instead of having a convention, we're having a convention for 2 years in a row. John, will you back me up on this? That they're talking the whole time and making choices about their picks. You think that's right? Basically right. I'll take from John Fortier. I'll take basically right. Okay. Do we have any other questions in the room? Well, John, he's back. He's back for more.
Yeah. So I'm from Beverly, Virginia, Arlington, Virginia. So
The People's Republic.
now I missed the beginning of your talk, so I maybe you covered this, but of course Northern Virginia is very important, and there are all sorts of reasons why demographics have shifted in Virginia and the growth areas, Northern Virginia. What do you think about the other parts of Virginia, more Republican parts of Virginia, which have moved to become more Republican? Yes, they're not growth areas. What kind of turnout are we going to see? What kind of enthusiasm is there on the Republican side?
Well, and to add on to that, and let's go down the row on this, not just Republican enthusiasm and turnout, but overall turnout. Let's start with Kristen, who has data, and then we'll make up the rest of the stuff. Kristen, what kind of turnout do you think we're going to see?
So I think turnout will be reasonably high because both parties pretty much like their candidates. There were some issues with, Gillespie. Had he fired up the Republican base enough? Remember, after he lost, there was this big conflict over, did he lose because he lost suburban voters, or did he lose because he did not turn out the Trump coalition because he was too much of an establishment guy? I don't know that we're going to have that kind of fight if Youngkin does not prevail, because I think he has become acceptable to all wings of the Republican Party in Virginia. I do think one other issue that we haven't talked about, but I believe McAuliffe has been running ads on, is climate. And so, coal country in Virginia has become increasingly an important part of the Republican coalition there. That while all sorts of other parts of the state are getting bluer, that part of the state during the Trump era has become redder and redder. And so, a message coming from the Democrats on an issue like climate, that might be a somewhat smart attempt to win back some of those suburban voters that they're worried will be lost to Youngkin on his other issues. But does that just remind those voters who, the big question is, does the Trump coalition turn out when Trump's not on the ballot? So we were talking about, do you get the downsides of Trump, are they transferable? I still think a big open question on which Republicans' fortunes in 2022 will hinge is, can you turn out the Trump coalition without Trump on the ballot? And this will be one interesting experiment.
Robert, how many times did you stand for election?
10.
Not bad. That's a lot of times to run for something. What do the auguries say? If we look into the tea leaves in the bottom of the cup, how big turnout is this? Are we obsessing over this, but normal people aren't? Is this going to be a big turnout, low turnout?
I think it's going to be a higher than normal turnout, and I think that's at least in part caused by the momentum that you're seeing, that not only in Virginia in terms of the polling, but also in New Jersey, and then the other side of it, which is good fortune. It's not necessarily anything that Youngkin has done to deserve it, but it's good fortune. I mean, Biden has just tanked, right? And that's not to say that there's not But there's not, and that's not to say though that the Democrats don't have an unbelievable organization. To Mo's point, they do. But the question is can you still sustain that when the president's numbers are sliding and the national atmosphere it's just hard.
So you
for
said
Democrats,
well,
in my
hold
opinion.
on. Then, so we have 2 for big turnout. Mo, what do you say? Big turnout?
Big turnout.
Okay.
There's a huge narrative out there that Terry's in trouble because Biden's numbers are down.
What's not helping?
I get that, right? Find me a poll that shows where Donald Trump is doing better than Joe Biden in Virginia.
A Fox News poll that Republicans were touting that showed that Biden was underwater with Virginia voters, and they were talking about that a lot. Trump was underwater 16 points. Biden was even 49-49, and Trump was underwater 16 points.
Right? Now, I do believe Biden's numbers translate more to the electorate than Trump's
Higher salience, yeah.
necessarily do, right? But this is why both sides are relying so much on these wins, right? Why Terry is trying so hard to connect Youngkin. And Youngkin hasn't done, I think, enough to necessarily dispel this notion. But why he's trying so hard to connect him to Trump? Because Trump is still a far, far more toxic brand in Virginia than Biden is. And look, to your question about Nova versus Rova.
That's really good.
It's not good.
That's funny. That's a funny joke.
But it is, there
No,
is
it
a
is. I
huge
know it.
divide, right?
Yeah.
Look, I think down in Southwest Virginia, these coal voters, like they've been there. They've been there for a while. Will they be juiced up a little bit more because McAuliffe is running? Maybe, but will it be?
Well, he's also probably not running those ads in that
He's
market.
not running those ads in that market, right?
So
The benefit.
Withful is not where he's,
right?
yeah.
But I have worked for enough Democrats in my life who were so concerned about alienating those coal voters that they wouldn't embrace the climate argument, that they didn't pick up any votes down in the Southwest Virginia, and they didn't get them any support in the suburbs. So I think Terry is smart to try to focus on the issues that he knows his coalition is going to respond to. But I agree with both. I think you're going to see high turnout across the board. And we're just not going to know. We're already seeing the trends that benefit Terry in the early vote. But I've also seen enough Democratic campaigns that focus so much on that they lose sight that the election day vote, as Donald Trump has shown us on more than one occasion, the election day vote can really change the dynamic.
A huge win.
I will say one other thing is that, yes, Trump is less popular in Virginia than Biden is. But McAuliffe will stand on a stage with Joe Biden nonetheless. And Youngkin has kept Trump at arm's length.
It's been a very
and
weird.
it has been a very weird dance.
like
and you
his side
even
piece
saw
situation.
this week the attempts. I think it was former President Obama who was basically trying to needle Trump into
I dare you.
you've got a week. Do you want to make a mess?
Oh, can
Come
you?
here.
I just want to say, if you're watching President Trump, please, we would like to cover you having a massive event in Northern Virginia next week. That would be good television. Samantha, did we have any questions from people who are not here in physical space?
So one from our virtual audience. So you mentioned that Virginia is often thought of as a bellwether for the national midterms. How should Democratic congressional candidates adapt their strategies going into the midterms if Youngkin wins? Should they
that's a
focus
very
on
good
economic issues, cultural issues?
And we've talked about this a little bit, but let's go down the row, starting with you, Robert. Put on your Democrat hat for a second. What lessons should Democrats learn from this race?
Well, I mean, I think we got to get results first, right? I mean,
We stipulate. You're as bad as Mo now.
Yeah, but it's a hard question as a consequence. I think that we will. I think that Democrats will learn how effective the Trump attacks are. I mean, I think that will inform them, and I think it will inform Republican candidates. How do I deal with this issue when you have the people you're courting divided the way they are. And in many ways, that's the same issue that the Democrats.
Kristen?
I think if Youngkin wins, it will be a big victory for what is known as the niche internet debate called shoreism. So there's a Democratic political scientist named David Shore who got kind of excommunicated from his firm for having the audacity to tweet a paper from a Princeton political scientist that suggested that riots that become violent sometimes actually hurt the cause of racial justice in a way that nonviolent protests do not. And this became like very controversial because it was sort of framed as well as he discounting the real anger that people are feeling out there in the streets in the wake of George Floyd.
And he is now the doyen of
Yes.
the Democratic elite.
And
that
so
they're back. He's back.
He has bounced back from his cancellation and has sort of become the face of, hey, I'm personally a socialist, but Democrats, you are really messing this up by letting culture war, woke, whatever you want to call it, stuff pull you culturally too far away from where the median voter is. Why don't we just give people money and that is what they like? Why don't we just do that? Do things that are popular instead of doing things that our activists really like, has been kind of his message. And it's very controversial in Democratic circles. And I think if Youngkin wins, it will be a victory for shoreism in the intra-Democratic
And this is a victory for Elleitheeism, checks and wallets, shots and arms, right?
Checks and wallets, shots and arms. Here's what's next.
Yeah.
Whether or not Terry wins, whether or not Youngkin wins, that's the frickin' message next year. Checks and wallets, shots and arms. Here's what's next. And it ain't a big pile of money. It's here's the thing. And I don't care what 2021 shows us. If we're not singing that song in 2022, like, lights out.
Well, if everybody was as thoughtful and patriotic and decent as our panelists today, both parties would be in a much better position, and the country would be much healthier. So we thank you. On behalf of everybody here, the American Enterprise Institute, we're really grateful that you made time for us. It's a big deal, so yay.
Thank you.
Thank you.